McLean. Deck Coach's Corner.
You're listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer,
For someone to explain.
bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby,
The distinction between these mandatory
sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode number 35 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Scott Allen. Scott is the assistant coach for the Wallaroos, the Australian women's rugby team, and is currently in the midst of their 2017 Women's Rugby World Cup campaign preparations. He's had previous senior coaching roles with the University of Queensland and was also a prominent analyst on the Raw website and the Green and Gold podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Scott, so welcome.
G'day, Andy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries. We touched a bit on your backstory there. How did you get into coaching, and what's a bit of a summary of your playing career and your coaching career so far?
Oh, I think playing career could be best described as a bit of size, a bit of talent, but far too lazy. So didn't really ever do anything with it. When the time came, when I got the call up, I took a job, and that was back in the amateur days. So I took a job over playing rugby and regretted it later, but so be it.
Yeah.
And then coaching, look, my son was playing rugby at school. I hadn't had a lot to do with rugby for about 10 years. So I just started helping his team. And then, he started playing club, so I started helping that team, and it went from there. When eventually he graduated from school, I was enjoying it so much, I decided to go and coach senior rugby. So got into it, started doing that about 10 years ago, and progressed through to what's a Premier Grade level here in Australia. So basically the level below Super Rugby. So, we have Super Rugby players coming back and playing for the club, sometimes Wallabies, when they're not obviously engaged in the Super Comp. And then, a good mix of Australian under-20 players and players who now play in the NRC. So good standard. Being a university side, we're always a very young team. So average age in last year's team was 21.
Right.
All very talented players, but young, and I found that very enjoyable coaching. Less experienced players, and watching them develop over time.
Yeah, for sure. There must be no shortage of energy either in the group.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, and now you've got yourself into a national coaching role with the Wallaroos. How's that been so far? What's a bit of a general description of your role there and the experience so far?
So I'm the assistant coach. Primarily look after the forwards. Head coach looks after the backs. So there's just the two of us. But I've also taken on the breakdown work, general attacking play, exits. I'd not had anything to do with women's rugby before last year.
Yeah.
So bit of a shock to me, and in learning just the different ways things are done. But essentially, the best advice I got before I took on the role was from one of the senior medical people at our club. And I said to her, give me some tips. And she said, I can tell you that the girls just want to be treated like rugby players.
Yeah, no
and
doubt.
essentially that's it. Just because they're female doesn't mean we do anything different. Look, it's been really interesting. It's very different in the national role, because obviously the players are spread out all around the country. You don't get to see them in pre-season. You don't get to see them every week. With the budgetary constraints that are in women's rugby, we don't have the ability to fly around the country and do sessions with the girls in each city. This year we'll see them the day that we hop on the plane to go for our first test.
Wow.
So our preparation is, there's lots of work by phone, email, doing a lot of video work. So, we're at the level where we've got the girls, we'll do something. We're working on a particular area, have somebody video it on their mobile phone, send me the video. I'll cut that video up, compare it to the previous one we had them do, and, look at the technique that they're working on. We have got the ability to fly around the country and see some games and work with some players.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's very different not having your whole group together, essentially until you hop on the plane. And then you got a few days preparation. So we have to basically keep as much as we can out of what we did this year, and then slowly build on it. It's very hard to introduce lots of new things. We'll get a bit more time together before the World Cup in Ireland in August this year. But yeah, the time constraint is something that's very different, and something that, basically I'm finding we have to come up with new ways to overcome that.
Yeah, and I think being based in Canada and being involved with some regional teams and some age grade national stuff, that's like it's frustrating at times, but it's also pretty cool because it throws out some challenges to you that, okay, what can we do 1,000 kilometers away from each other? And with the technology that we have now, and like you say, the use of videos and the use of just Skype or simple things like that, you can really check some boxes there over a good period of time there.
Yeah, well, look, one of the good things is, if you're normally in a situation where you're with the team week in, week out, or even on a tour,
Mm-hmm.
you're able to sit with the players after a match and go through their video with them
Mm-hmm.
and look at things they did well and things they could do better. You have very limited opportunity to do that, obviously, now, but the beauty is that, we take the footage we get. I actually put it into a video review as though I was sitting with the player and do the voiceover of it and then send it off to them. The good part with that is if they were say we were doing the review just before training,
Mm-hmm.
only a certain amount goes in and gets retained.
Yeah.
Because they're thinking about running on the field, or they've forgotten it during training. With this one, they can watch it 10 times if they want and keep going on the points until they get it. So
Yeah.
it actually does have some advantages in that regard.
Yeah, for sure. And you can just hammer home 4 or 5 key areas that you think are fundamental for success.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So the Women's Rugby World Cup, like you said, it's in Ireland in August. Could be worse places to go and be involved in a World Cup. So how's the lead up going to look like that for that tournament?
So we've got our women's nationals in May this year. So each state and territory puts a team in. That's a 3-day tournament that we'll attend, and effectively we use that as our selection tournament. We've got a squad of players at the moment who are on training programs. We hope then that they'll all get selected in their state and territory teams. We'll then pick a squad out of that, of 26 players. And 2 weeks later, we head to New Zealand for a Four Nations tournament. We're playing top 3 teams in the world, so New Zealand, England and Canada.
Mm-hmm.
So 1 test each. So that'll be really good build-up for us playing such high-quality opposition. That's a really good lead-up. So that's June. Then we head off late July to Ireland. We're hoping to have a warm-up game before the tournament. And then we play Ireland in the first round, France in the second round, and then Japan in the final round of the pool stages. And then we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, and that's, people might look at that and say, oh, that's a doable pool. But, talk about 2 women's sides who have really shown a lot of improvement in the last couple of years are Ireland and France. And, I think the last men's Rugby World Cup goes to show that you should never underestimate Japan. So it should be some good challenges there.
Yeah, well, you've only got to look at what Ireland did in the last World Cup in 2014, where they beat the Black Ferns, which is
absolutely,
I think the only loss they've had in 5-6 years. So they're a really good team, and playing them at home is going to be a real challenge. It's great we get them in our opening match. So both teams should be fully fit. And then 4 days later, we're back up against France, and look, they're a really good team. But we'll keep a keen eye on the Six Nations that starts next month.
Yeah.
Women's Six Nations, and see what those 2 teams in particular do. Really looking forward to it. It's going to be a great year.
Okay, great. Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on that. And I watched the last Women's World Cup closely, and the quality of rugby was outstanding. And I really think it's just going to take that next step up, and just just seeing the women's sevens game, I just think it'll be an amazing tournament. So yeah, I can't wait to watch it. Okay, so moving on, we're focusing this episode on line-out work, and like you said, you're the women's forwards coach. When you're working with a team and it's the first session you've had with the group, how would that look like if you're doing solely a line-out session? What would that first session look like if someone was watching?
So I probably do things slightly differently. I focus very much on the technical aspect of line-out lifting. At the very beginning.
Yep.
My view is that, if you think about it, how many times have you watched a line out where a caller's got the call right, the jumper's in space, they go up uncontested and the ball sails over the top of them. And most people, always blame the thrower. It's always, it's always the thrower's fault. But then you look at it and half the time it's because the lift was poor. And it's a bit like somebody throwing darts at a dartboard. If you were to move the dartboard just before they threw, and then you blame them for not hitting the bullseye, it's a bit unrealistic. So, I believe one of the key elements in a line-out is that you got to get your lift right so that the jumper's in the same spot that the hooker expects every time. Otherwise, you can have the best hooker in throwing in the world. You can have the best line-out calls in the world. You can spend all this time practicing them. If you don't get your lift right, the ball misses the target. So I always start on that, and get down to just the very basics of technique. I like to use some keywords that I have. I also use some analogy to the clean and jerk in weightlifting, particularly the jerk part of the lift. I see lots of similarities between the two. So focus very hard on the real basics. I get down to the position of the hands on the jumper, because that then impacts on whether you can lock your arms out, which then impacts on whether you can get full extension in the lift and therefore get the jumper to the right height. We talk about, lots of line-out coaches, we all talk about, either stepping in, making an A-frame, chest to chest of the lifters. I like to relate it back to the weightlifting scenario. Have you ever seen a weightlifter try to hold the bar up and get 3 green lights and keep the weight out in front of them? It doesn't happen. Yeah. So, they know that the only way to hold a heavy weight up is to get it up, above your head as much as possible. So, work on that sort of scenario. I actually get to the point in my first line-out sessions, and there's always bemused looks from players that haven't been coached by me before, when I turn up with a barbell. To a line-out session.
Nice. What's this going to be like?
Yeah, exactly. And, and then it's just doing something different to try and get away from, they may have heard step closer, all those things in the past. So do something different, and then work on that technique. And so I basically start in pods of 3, very static, just have a jumper with the 2 lifters, no movement, get that technique right. And then, got a couple of little games that I play where, they have to make a continuous number of lifts with the ball going around circles. Once I see that we're actually getting the lift to full height and therefore we can rely on where it's going to be, only then do I start getting a ball and a thrower involved. And again, just start really basic. Start with the static lift. Then start with the lifters coming to the jumper, then the jumper moving to the lifters, nothing out of the ordinary. And, I find if we can get all of that right, then, and really that probably takes a couple of sessions before I'm comfortable that the basics are okay. One of the other things that I like to work on a lot with jumpers is, their footwork. Quite often you'll see jumpers take 3 steps to get into their jump when they could have taken 2, and it's as simple as if you started with this foot instead of this foot, you would have cut a step out, and that step saves a lot of time. With the jumpers, I look for the basic errors of, my feeling is that most jumpers believe that they're the ones who actually get the height in the jump. The reality is the best jump, the jumper really only gets 20 centimetres off the ground before the lifters take over. So do you really need to dip down so that your thighs are almost parallel with the ground to get 20 centimetres off the ground? No. you only need a small dip. If you did that small dip fast and just got your 20 centimetres off the ground, you're much faster than the opposition jumper, and you get into the air faster.
Yeah.
So,
It's a
so work on
tougher read too for the defensive jumper as well.
Yeah, exactly. And and then I get down to the basics of, we all know that we want the jumper to be like a plank of wood in the air rather than a garden hose flopping around. I think everyone's been coached that. But one thing the common fault that I see with jumpers is they sort of flap their arms around. It's like they're trying to fly and take off. So, work with the jumpers to get your hands and elbows in nice and close to your body. Keep everything tight and compact, which again makes you faster, makes you more rigid in the air. So as I say, I really like to get down into that detail and get that right, because the best line-out move in the world will fall apart if you don't have those things right in the first place.
No, and that's a classic thing too. Like you see it a lot in school rugby as well. I remember when the All Blacks beat the French in the final. Was that 2011? And I think it was Woodcock who split through the middle there with a moving back pod. I think the following school rugby season, every line-out was trying to do that, but the jumper couldn't get up, the lifters couldn't hold him, and the thrower couldn't throw. So it just comes back to those fundamental core skills that they're non-negotiable for anything to move forward.
Yeah, well, look, it's typical when you turn up to training that the players, they're not, when they're doing a line-out session, they're actually looking to practice these line-outs and the new moves they might have come up with. It's a bit like when you go to, you're going to practice your attack. Everyone wants to practice the play, but no one wants to practice the catch and pass, which is actually essential to the play that you're going to run.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the same in a line-out. So
yeah. Okay, what about subtleties between front lifter and back lifter? What do you find has worked for you?
I'm amazed at how many players don't really understand the concept of getting the timing right. So, whether it should be a jump throw or a throw jump.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, that comes back to the basics. Also amazed at the number of front jumpers who, dip down at all. And really, we've seen Etzebeth from South Africa, the way he starts in his loaded position down low so that his movement is straight up.
Yeah.
Well, if you've got a light front jumper, why do they even have to start loaded down like that? They can basically spring from a standing position if they're light, and the lifters can take over and just throw them straight up. It's a tenth of a second it takes to dip down and get back up, or maybe 2/10, but that time is all that the opposition needs. And of course, they can read what you're doing. If they see you dipping down, well, they know what's on. So, there's that difference obviously there. The movement across the ground is always a big issue with your middle and rear jumpers. In that you get jumpers running into lifters. People, as soon as there's movement, one of the big problems I find is that as the weight, let's say we're going backwards onto the back lifter, as that weight comes back on them, they make the mistake of stepping backwards. And as soon as they do that, they lose height.
Yeah.
So again, a real fundamental, and you're talking about that move that the All Blacks used in the World Cup final. If you watch the rear lifter in that, he actually braces for impact, and as the jumper comes back onto him, he's moving forward to counteract the momentum that the jumper had. So little things like that are really important. Everybody being ready, particularly in the middle of the line out, being ready to lift even when the calls changed at the last minute. So many players, when they're back in the line out, think they've got time to correct mistakes and catch up. But, you get the front lifter who's in position and there's been some movement and they start to lift. Well, as they lift, obviously they can't lift straight up, so they start to push back against the jumper. If that rear lifter's not there immediately, then, the lift becomes one-sided. So, again, split seconds make all the difference when you've got movement in the middle of the line-out.
Yeah, exactly. All right, cool. You touched on a little bit of that. You bring a barbell to your first session, which I think is awesome. On that note, what are some of the strength and conditioning crossovers that you see that, that your forward pack, if they're in the weight room, you think, okay, they have to be doing these specific lifts to transfer over into their line-out work?
Yeah, well, obviously we do the normal lifts, but then we introduced last year one that I've used in the past where with the bar is into a slot on the ground with no weight on that end, and it's weight on the other end that you're holding onto.
Okay.
But effectively you're just lifting as though you were starting to lift in a line out. And you're doing that repeatedly. So you're squatting down in the same way you would, and you're pushing away from you the same as you would in a line out, rather than lifting straight up and down.
Yeah.
It's a simple stuff. Doesn't take any extra equipment. It's just a matter of making sure you've got a brace on the floor. So we've added that to what the girls are doing. We obviously have increased the specific core work we're doing for all the forwards. Because that obviously applies in both lifting and jumping in the lineout, as it does in all aspects of the game, but particularly for the set piece work. But look, one of the other basics is just doing a lot of that jerk work. So but not doing it from the standing start, doing it from the sort of height that you would be as a lifter, getting down in position with the bar on your chest, and then exploding up. And how quickly can you get that bar to the top of your lift? And you're getting all the benefits of building muscle, but you're also getting that muscle memory into how fast can I get this up, because the lift is all about explosive power. So, I like to see them doing a lot of that in the gym.
Okay, great. You touched on earlier that the playing group is really spread out. So obviously they're going to be responsible for a lot of their own skill development when they're outside of sessions. What are some of the key responsibilities you give your players, specifically with lineouts, that they need to be doing individually or in small groups?
So a lot of it starts with match review. So we've got all the girls at the moment reviewing past footage of the teams we'll play in the World Cup. What are the trends? What do they do both in attacking lineouts and defensive lineouts? Where are the opportunities? And that I find that starts to get them thinking more about their role. Whether it means we'll change anything in our lineouts is another matter altogether. We'll get to see the results of that. But if they're thinking about what they have to do, and if I've got the key words across to them in all these technique, what I'm looking for is them to come back on a clip and not just say, 2 moved here and 3 did this, and here's the trigger for the lineout, but to look at it and say, look at the good lift there. They did what you told us to do and they didn't, and look what happened. So if they can start to pick up those differences, then as a coach, I've done my job, and they start to coach themselves. So when they're working in their groups, that's what I'm encouraging. I'm telling them, you're all coaches. Just because I'm not there, if you're not the one that's involved in that pod of 3 working on your lift or your jump, then you should be standing alongside and saying your hands are in the wrong spot, or you're not doing what Scott told us to, or whatever. So, I'm using them basically as assistant coaches. One of the other things I've done is, we have a certain line-out structure, and I'm working with all the potential callers, and I'll send them a video once a week with 10 different setups, just animated graphics on the screen that says to them, of the 10, which call of ours would you use based on what I've put the opposition doing? Where's the space? And have them then submit back to me their 10 answers. There's never an absolute right or wrong because it's on a piece of paper, but I can then go back to them and say, well, why did you pick that option? What about, look at the space you missed? Or, and they're getting better at that. So little things like that are things that I'm asking to do in terms of the lineout.
Yeah, that's great. And I think just getting players up to that competitive level and those decisions under pressure, under fatigue, if they feel like they've been there already, that's got to be a massive advantage.
Yeah, well, look, it's starting to have an impact. We didn't have a lot of time together last year, so and look, everybody learns differently. We all know that. So some look at a piece of paper with circles moving on it. And say, well, I can't relate that to a lineout. Others get it. Even if they don't actually get it, I just want them to start thinking about it. That it's not just I'm going to walk into a line out and I'm going to run a call because that's my favourite call or it worked last time.
Yeah.
And they may not be the only things I'll do. Basically, with this new role, because we haven't got the girls with us, I'm trying to come up with new things. I'd often wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, why don't I try that? So
I think
a work.
Yeah, that's a coach's curse right there.
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, cool, sweet, awesome. Okay, well, one area that I think's really undercoached in the game is defensive lineouts. And if I think one of my top 3 live Wallabies moments was watching Justin Harrison steal that one in the final minutes of the 3rd British Lions test in 2001. Such a crucial part of the set piece game. How do you incorporate that into your sessions and into your remote work that you do with the girls?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. So we set a target, and we will win a percentage of our lineouts, and it's actually encompasses what we win off the opposition as well. So I'd actually like to think that we could win more than 100%, and the girls say to me, "How is it possible we can win more than 100%?" So if we've got 10 lineouts and we win all 10, well, we win one of theirs, well, we've got 110% of ours, haven't we? So if we only win 90% of ours, then we've got to win enough that, we get back above 100% by winning some off them. So, you can get just as good a ball off a defensive lineout as you can off an attacking lineout. You also have the advantage that the attacking backline's not set up in defence. I think it's easier to transition from defence into attack than it is from attack into defence. So it's really valuable ball. I know we got punished in New Zealand with some pretty poor throws, and they made us pay last year when we played them when we lost lineouts. So it's a key thing. We do work on it. I find in sessions you're always time constrained.
Yeah.
And I probably don't spend as much time as I would like to on defensive lineouts, and that's purely a factor of we can't get our own lineouts right in the first place. So, you maybe put 80% of your focus on winning your own ball, and then where possible throw in a bit of time on defensive. So then I try to counter that by actually going in and doing a lot of work myself, and then getting the girls to do work on what the opposition does, so that we know. Doesn't always work. In New Zealand, when we played them last year, had a particular line-out, which I knew was coming. I showed the girls, I don't know how many times. We had a plan for it. The plan I thought would work. The first time they ran it, we forgot the plan, or I don't know what happened. The second time we remembered half the plan, and the third time we actually did it, we remembered the plan, and it worked.
Okay.
And the girls in the dugout said to me, when we came off the field, they said, when they ran that first line out, we were going, here it is, Scotty showed us this, we know what to do, and then we didn't do anything, and they said, he's going to be mad. So, you can have the best plans. At the end of the day, it's about everyone in the line out looking up and seeing what the opposition are doing, because they can run variations of things you've seen in the past. And you've got to be able to react, and that's the key in defensive lineouts. It's speed.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point there, just from a coaching and a player point of view, is like it's so experiential. Like, the amount between those two games, I think you cut the score in half. Obviously, that New Zealand team is very strong, but you cut the score in half, so that shows that they got to that competitive level in a very short turnaround, and that just by experiencing that there must be massive learnings involved in the playing group, but also just that understanding that you got to respect the process of the journey, that it's not going to happen in that first game, and that it is a process.
Yeah, well, look, one of the things for us is we've played 2 tests now in the last 4 seasons, so
yeah, exactly.
we need more rugby. We don't need to be watching video screens or talking about it. We had one test where we were like deers in the headlights, and New Zealand were fantastic. We came out the second time, and we had 4 days to turn it around. We knew we couldn't fix everything, that it's a long-term process, so we picked 4 things And, we, as a coaching group, we sat down the day after that game and came up with our 4. And then we just spent 3 days training 4 things only. That's all we did. We got better in those 4 things. We didn't improve in lots of the other areas, but, made a massive difference. And that, I think you actually can learn a lot from that when you've got a limited amount of time to prepare, whether it's the first time you've coached a team or whether it's an inexperienced team that's had lots of changes due to injury, or you had short turnaround like we do. You just can't cover everything. And if you try to, you just overcomplicate everything, and you probably don't do a good job in 10 areas. You're better off to leave 6 areas and focus on 4, and do the best you can in those 4.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree. All right. Well, just a couple more questions on the line out, and then we'll wrap it up. We all have the dream that we have, 2 second rowers who are 6'8" and a couple of massive props who are going to throw them up into the stratosphere. What if you're a coach, however, and you've got a short pack, or you've even got a couple of tall timber guys? How does that change your setup for your line out? I think we saw it. Argentina struggled a bit with this in the rugby championship. Excellent scrummage, but they were fairly short in terms of line out. So how would you change that up in terms of your playing group profile?
So, I'll start with if you've got some talls, and particularly you've got 1 or 2 only. The opposition are going to target them really hard. You know that they're probably a good chance to win ball for you because they're hopefully good jumpers. But with the opposition really marking them, you'll often find that one of the smaller guys is open anyway.
Yeah.
So you can use the talls even as a decoy, and until because they will have gone in with a plan, making sure the guy who's in slot number 5. He's their tallest guy. He's their caller. He always calls to himself, for example. I like to think of lineouts as a bit like, a magic trick. You show people one thing and then you do another, or you do things so fast before they've even had a chance to think about what you're doing. So with the tall guys or tall players, you may show them that's where we're going and then do something else and use your shorts anyway. Use the talls as a lifter. So if they're looking for the cue that the tall guy is about to move and become the jumper, well, if he's a lifter, well, they weren't expecting that. So, there's another way to do it. If you've got all short players, one of the things that there's an advantage there is they don't know who's going to be the jumper.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you've got a full line out, you may well tape up, 5 of your back 5. It may well be that you're only going to use 3, but tape them all up so they look like they're jumpers. And all of a sudden I've got 5 short players in front of me. Which one's the jumper? Any one of them could be it. And you may only pick 1 or 2, but straight away you're starting to, add a little bit of something different to them. As I said, if you've got talls, they start to shift towards that. But how do you defend 5 short jumpers across the park? So get your structures there, particularly with short jumpers. I just like to use a lot of movement, and do things differently. And again, speed. If they're short, they should be faster than the big, tall players. So use that speed advantage again.
Yeah, right. And what about reducing numbers in the line out? How would you incorporate that?
Yeah, so most teams will go down to 5.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, at lower levels in particular, if you've got a full line out, teams will often defend with 2 fixed pods of 3. They'll try to look like they've got someone who could switch between pods, but the more they're under pressure, the more they fall back to it's 2 fixed pods of 3. If you go to a 6-person line out, well, that does nothing for you because they've still got 2 fixed pods of 3. As soon as you go to 5, at least you've broken the 2 pods and you're forcing them to start making a decision. So that seems to be the default for everyone. But I tell you one, we use a lot. I've used a lot in the past as a 4-man. And as soon as you go there, it really starts to break things up because everybody's practiced for 5.
Yeah.
when you go to 3, it's too easy because you've really only got limited options. But a 4 is a really good option because it's something that not a lot of teams practice for. They'll work on 7 and 5. As soon as you go to 4, you get the immediate confusion of, well, who drops out on a 4? And while they're thinking about who should drop out, you run your line out.
Yeah, the ball's in the air.
Yeah. You can do lots of really interesting things. You can set up, in a 3 at the front, nothing in the middle, and 1 at the back. That as soon as you do that, if they don't defend the back, then all you got to do is get that 2 of those players back there, and you're in clear space.
Yeah.
But as soon as they do defend the back, the middle is massively open for you. And as soon as they start thinking about covering the middle, well, you're already in position at the front.
You go for the front, yeah.
So, you can do lots of really interesting things with a 4-person line-out.
All right, sweet. For the coaches out there who want to find some online resources that are going to upskill their line-out coaching, what are some of the ones that you go to when required?
I've looked at some stuff that's on the rugby side. I've seen some videos there in the past. I think Victor Matfield had some probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I'm sure they'll still be up there. Really good. He had some really good ones on. He was using a schoolboy team. Had some really good ones on movement at the front. But he also had someone just on the technique of his jumping. I mean, I happen to think that he's one of the best line-out jumpers we've ever seen.
Totally agree.
Both technically and tactically. So, basically, I'd look for anything you can find from him. As I said, I always find that very interesting. The other thing, look, I'd be watching every All Black line-out you can. They have, between Retallick, Whitelock, Reed, and Kano as well. They've really got 5 genuine jumping options. But between Whitelock, Retallick, and Reed, they've got 3 of the best jumpers in the world. They're very good tactically, and their technical work is good. So if all you do is get clips of their lineouts and watch it very closely, you could do a lot worse than that.
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt. All right, well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were a kid growing up, who was one of your favourite players that drew you to the game?
So 1977-78 Australian schoolboys team went on a tour to the UK, and I think 10 of those schoolboys there ended up playing for the Wallabies. That included Mark Eller at fly half, who I think was an absolute genius. I used to love watching him play. Retired so young, it was a shame we didn't get to see a lot more of him. But one of the other guys that was on that tour and came back and switched to rugby league was Wally Lewis.
Yeah, absolutely.
Look, I think he's the most I think arguably the best rugby league player in the modern era, but certainly the most dominant rugby league player. And he was one of the toughest players, so he could play 8 or at 5'8".
Yeah.
And look, he had all the skills. I just loved watching him as I was growing up. He could belt people in defence, could run over the people in attack. He could run around them. He could kick. He had the fantastic long pass. So, look, I'd say he was probably my favourite player growing up. Even though he was playing league, he played a lot of league like he played union.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and being a long-suffering New South Wales Blues supporter, I remember being very upset in the 80s with his performances. They were outstanding.
Yeah, well, I saw a stat the other day, or yesterday it might have been, that of the first 14 State of Origin matches played, he won 6 man of the matches.
Oh, man, yeah.
So he's fairly dominant.
Yeah, and it's no wonder why there's a statue out the front of Lang Park for him. Well earned. Yeah. He's a beauty for sure. All right, and what about now? Who's some of your favourites going around?
Well, look, until he retired, 15 months ago or something, I would have said Richie McCaw.
Yeah.
Just thought he, both as a captain, as a tactician, but, his playing ability, incredible. I know lots of people say, played on the edge and bent the rules, but that's his role as a number 7.
Absolutely.
did it better than anyone. His skills were incredible. But given he's retired, I think I've got two now that really I think are fantastic. And one's Brodie Retallick and the other Kieran Reid from the All Blacks.
Yeah.
Retallick, to me is changing what a lock does. I mean, his skill level for such a big man, and he doesn't look like he's an athlete, but he's so skillful. And Kieran Reid is just about the complete rugby player, I think.
Yeah, and you look at Retallick in that attacking pattern that the All Blacks use. He's often in the first receiver role and throwing a 10-metre pass. Sometimes he's unreal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great. All right, and what about coaches? Who's a high-profile coach that you respect and like what they're doing?
Well, I always thought Rod McQueen, who coached the Wallabies back in the late 90s, he was not obviously a good coach, but he was really innovative. He was there at the start of the professional era. He was the guy that led lots of the developments that, have taken the game where it's gone now, when he worked out what would happen in the professional game and how to play. So he had success at, state level and then at national level, and winning a World Cup, obviously, beating the British and Irish Lions. Look, I just thought he was a great coach. His book is one that I read every couple of years. And he goes through the process of taking over a downtrodden and dispirited Wallabies team, and within 2 years they'd won the World Cup. And how did he do that? And how did he introduce business principles into rugby, into a team environment? That was great. But one of the others that I read his book regularly is Jim Greenwood. So used to coach Scotland and then played for Scotland and the British and Irish Lions. And he wrote that book called Total Rugby.
Yeah.
And if you read that book, it's almost like a blueprint for how the All Blacks play now. And yet it was written in the late 70s.
Yeah, he's got another one, Think Rugby, right? I think he put out another one. There was Think Rugby and Total Rugby as well. Yeah, he's pretty ahead of his time for sure.
Absolutely. So what I liked about both of them is they were innovators.
Absolutely. All right, last question. Who's a coach then who's maybe doesn't have the profile that Rob McQueen or Jim Greenwood do, but who's doing great work and that you respect what they're doing?
So from Australia at the moment, there's a guy called Simon Cron. He's Mike Cron's nephew.
Yep.
Yeah, so the All Black scrum coach, took North Sydney, which is my old club, to their first premiership in, I think, 40 years or even longer last year. He's a Kiwi, but he's well and truly ensconced in Australia now. And he's just been appointed the Australian Under-20s head coach. They're off to play in the Under-20 World Cup in Georgia. I think it is in June. Look, he's a very smart guy, got some good ideas. Haven't been involved with him closely as a coach, but his track record and the discussions I've had with him certainly indicates to me that he's a coach to watch. And I think you will see him come up through the Australian system. I wouldn't be surprised to see him picked up in Super Rugby in the next year or two. And then who knows where he'll go from there. So he's a guy I'd keep an eye out for.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, that's great. Yeah, and that was a huge result for North Sydney, and obviously something special going on there, and he played a big part in that. So that's great. All right. Well, great to have you on the show. Great to chat lineouts. It's the first lineout episode we've had. So being a backs coach, I've learned a bunch and really enjoyed it, and no doubt listeners will get a huge amount out of it. So really want to thank you for coming on the show, and want to wish you all the best with the Wallaroos in Ireland in August. And thanks again, Scott, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, Andy. It's always good to just chat rugby.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, beauty. Great. Cheers, mate.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us on Twitter at RugbyCoachSCNR or via the website at therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.